Where else would you rather be than right here, right now? Tuning in to Bills Central Radio.
Time now for Bills Central Radio with ProFootballCentral.com's Chris Brown and BillsMafia.com Del Reid.
Let's go Buffalo. Let's go Buffalo. Let's go Buffalo. Touchdown, rain, sleet, or snow.
Live here on Bills Central Radio. My name is Chris Brown, and I'm here with the co-host of the show, Del Reid. How are we doing today, Del?
Good morning. How you doing, man?
Doing fantastic. We got an excellent show this week. We have a few guests here on the show. First, we have Erik, Frenz, as well as we're going to have Chris Trapasso on the show. And then we're also going to have the announcement of our Fathead Twitter contest winner here on the podcast radio show this week. So a lot of exciting things going on this week. We're going to start off the show by having our first guest of the week here, Erik Frenz. Erik is the AFC East lead writer for Bleacher Report, and he also is a contributor to Boston.com. Thank you for joining us today, Erik. How are you?
Thanks for having me, guys. Doing well. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. So we wanted to have you on the show to get your opinion on a few things going on with the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills, of course. I'll start it off by asking you, what were your thoughts about how the AFC as a whole shaped up this offseason, with the Dolphins adding all the high-priced free agents, the Bills drafting E.J. Manuel in the first round, the Patriots defense becoming Rutgers University, quote-unquote, so to speak, and then with all the craziness that's going on with the Jets quarterback situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll start off with the Bills because that's what we're here to talk about, and I thought it was really interesting that they went after E.J. Manuel. You know, it was one of those things where, you know, everybody kind of had their preconceived notions on who the Bills were going to go after. A lot of people were expecting it to be Ryan Nassib because of the connection between him and Doug Marrone, but obviously the Bills had different plans, and I think it's interesting because it really is it's really a sign of the times that E.J. Manuel was even a first-round pick, in my opinion, just because when you look at the way that that NFL teams are looking for quarterbacks right now that are much more athletic, that are much more mobile, have a bigger arm. That's kind of the way that the NFL is going now. And you know, one of the knocks on E.J. Manuel was that, you know, his system was a one-read system where he didn't really have to carry the burden of an offense, or he didn't have to make, you know, pre-snap checks, and he didn't really have he didn't call a lot of audibles at the line, didn't have to go through his progressions a lot. But I think the way that the NFL is gearing now, it's towards quarterbacks who they bring them in and they tailor the offense to their skill sets. So I would really expect the Bills to do that. It'll be interesting to see how they do that because, you know, their offense was very, it was, I don't want to call it vanilla under Ryan Nassib and Doug Marrone at Syracuse, but there were some vanilla aspects to it, just in terms of the college aspect. And then with the Dolphins, you know, it's interesting because I always go back to how much teams have struggled to make that free agency binge work. And every time it happens, you know, you talk about the Philadelphia Eagles did it a couple of years back. They set their franchise back a few years by doing that, and now they're kind of starting from scratch with a brand new head coach and a lot of changes in the personnel. And the Buffalo Bills last year, you know, bringing in Mario Williams and Mark Anderson, you know, obviously, you know, we've yet to see whether or not those signings will pan out for them, but that was another one of those things where it took a little bit for everything to gel, and it'll be interesting to see if everything can get together really quickly for the Dolphins because, I mean, it's not just on one side of the ball like it was with the Bills last year. You know, it's, you know, on defense, they've pretty much overhauled their entire linebacking core. On offense, they've pretty much overhauled their entire wide receiving core. So a lot of changes going on there. It'll be interesting, but I think it really all kind of rides on Ryan Tannehill. And then with the Jets, I mean, the quarterback situation there, it's people are going to talk about that ad nauseum, but I think it's just kind of a microcosm of everything that's going on with the Jets right now. Just, you know, a lot of hope in 2009, 2010 with Mark Sanchez, as there was at pretty much every position, you know, at wide receiver, running back with Sean Green. On defense, they had a great defense for years, and Calvin Pace and Brian Thomas were decent enough pass rushers, but, you know, things have changed pretty quickly, and they're kind of starting from the ground and building up again. And then the Patriots, you know, I think the big theme for them this offseason is that it's been a lot of change and a lot of taking chances. I think they had a known commodity with Welker and what the offense was for the past 5-6 years, but it felt like time to take a chance and see. We can step in another direction and see maybe it won't be as good immediately, but the chance of it being better is good enough that we'll take that shot and we'll see, because the thing about their offense was that it was so condensed to the middle of the field in that 10-yard window with Gronkowski, with Hernandez, with Welker, all working in that middle area. So a lot of more outside threats now, and I think it'll be interesting to see if it all works out.
Now, keeping with the off-season trends here, what move do you think will benefit the Bills coming up in the upcoming season the most, whether it be the coaching change, player personnel, or even the front office change with the new GM being announced with Doug Whaley?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think the Doug Whaley move is going to have much of an impact immediately. Obviously, the storyline and the measure of success is going to be E.J. Manuel and Doug Marrone, period. That's really, if those two guys are successful, if those two guys are the right fits at their respective spots, then the Bills will be okay. I think the biggest impact immediately will be Mike Pettin being hired on defense, just as the amount of new looks that he can bring with him from the Jets, just how he utilizes players. I think it really works in the Bills' favor because they have a lot of talented players over there on defense. It's just a matter of getting them all in the right spots to do things that they are capable of doing, to play to their strengths, and really to generate more pressure. Because I think one of the big problems with Dave Wanstead's defense was that they really were just way too vanilla. It was they only blitzed, I think, on like 13% of defensive snaps, and that was one of the lowest percentages in the league. The average was 37%. So they were a good 20% below the league average in terms of how often they blitzed, and even just down to the very basic aspects of it, the direction that defensive linemen were rushing was pretty much all straight rushes. There were no stunts. There was really no angled rushing at all, no outside pressure. And it was interesting because I felt like, if they had just kind of mixed that up a little bit and made things a little bit more unpredictable, they would have been all right. But it was one of those things, I think, where the hiring of Dave Wanstead really kind of didn't take advantage of the defensive pieces as much as it possibly could have. And with Pettin in the fold now, I think that will change.
Hey, Erik, this is Del. First of all, I just want to say it's a pleasure to talk to you. I know we've been going back and forth on Twitter for probably over a year now, so thanks for joining us, and I'm looking forward to the remainder of this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Del. It's always good talking Bills, for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, yeah, I've said it several times, just real quick to your Wanstead point. I say that he's screwed the Bills over now 3 times, twice in a Super Bowl and once for the entire 2012 season. So he's dead to me. I'm done with that guy. So anyway, the AFC East, how do you see it shaking out this year? Do you think that the Bills are going to have a realistic shot at competing with the Patriots for the division title, or do you think they're going to be bringing up the rear again like they have for so many years now? Or just how do you see the division as a whole just ending up in 2013?
Well, no, I think it's still the Patriots' division to lose. I would be very surprised if they don't come out on top. It's with all the changes that there have been, I could understand why some fans might think that they're going to take a step back, but they have the ultimate trump card, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, and as long as they have those two guys, I think they'll pretty much be at the top. But beneath that, it's very tough to predict, to be totally honest with you. I think because there's so much change on every other team that at this point, you can go back to last year and say the Dolphins were the second best team in the division. They added X player, Y player, Z player, so therefore they'll be better and they'll be the number 2 team in the AFC East again. But like I said, it's not necessarily that easy where you just add players and get better. Like it doesn't work that way. So if they come into camp, they get on the same page quickly, then they could be a force. But if things don't work out quite as they plan, then it could be a tough go of it for them, and it might be interesting to see how things shake out in the long term if the Dolphins aren't successful immediately. But I would put the Bills and the Jets right there neck and neck at number 3 in the AFC East. I mean, it's one of those things where the head coach quarterback combo has been, it's been kind of hit or miss at times. With the Jets, they brought in Sanchez and Rex Ryan in the same year. They had some early success, but since then they've kind of struggled. In 2008, the Falcons brought in Mike Smith and Matt Ryan, and they were pretty much immediately successful, and they've been successful ever since. And the Ravens, they've been up and down with Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh, but they've been a playoff team pretty much every year, and they've been right in there in the mix pretty much every year. So it could be one of those things where it's early success, consistent success, but I think the big thing is it's right, like I said, it's all on them. It's all on EJ Manuel and Doug Marrone. I mean, I don't want to put all of the pressure of the whole season on them, but really the barometer of how this season goes, it will be how those two perform.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in play right now. It's difficult as a Bills fan to try and figure out exactly how the season's going to end up. I've been wussing out and just been telling people 8-8, so I don't have to commit to anything. I saw one guy on Twitter this morning who predicted a 5-11 season, with the caveat being that the 11 losses will be a lot more interesting than the losses in the past. So we'll see what happens. As Bills fans, we're looking for at least some interest to begin with. The team does seem to be in the right direction. But anyway, so speaking of the Bills, you just mentioned EJ Manuel and how he ties so closely to Marrone and everything. Who do you see starting against the Patriots Week 1? Do you see Manuel, or is there somebody else that you think could end up being under center? And also, with the amount of quarterbacks that are currently on the roster, who do you see not being in Buffalo come Week 1 of the season as well?
Well, I think right now it's probably a two-horse race between EJ Manuel and Kevin Kolb, and at that point, it would be really interesting to me if the Bills drafted EJ Manuel number 16 overall and didn't give him the starting job in Week 1, because I can't recall the last quarterback drafted in the first round who didn't start Week 1. So that would be some kind of aberration. And at this point, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Manuel was starter Week 1. Not just obviously for that fact, but like I said, you usually don't take a quarterback that high unless you plan on putting him out there immediately. So again, though, I wouldn't be surprised with either one. But at this point, I think if it's going to be three quarterbacks, it's going to be Kevin Kolb, EJ Manuel, and Tavares Jackson. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills just carried two, especially if EJ Manuel is the starter, because at that point, you're kind of looking at him and hoping that he's going to be there for the long haul for you. So why waste the extra roster spot? But again, I think if it's got to be one of the two of them, I would go personally with EJ Manuel. Just find out what you have in him, see what he can do right from the get go, and there are some deficiencies in his game that he's going to have to work through. But what better way to work through them than to be out there in the mix? So it's one of those other situations too where they have some weapons in place for him, so it's not like he's going out into an offense that's not ready for him to take over. They have Stevie Johnson, they have Robert Woods now, who I think is a great receiver. They have obviously C.J. Spiller, who's one of the best offensive skill position players in the game. They have a pretty solid offensive line, in my opinion, too. So they have a lot of pieces in place there for him to come in and to be successful right off the bat. And at that point, I think it's just on him to kind of go through the growing pains and to learn on the job. I think that would be the best situation for him.
Okay, absolutely. I can agree with your comment there, where you don't draft a quarterback that high and not have him start day one. And the trend is, basically anybody within, round one. The only one I can really think of would be an Aaron Rodgers, who sat behind Brett Favre for a few years and got drafted late in the first round with the Packers. But, I think it's EJ's job to win, and if he wants it, then I'm sure it'll be his. Now, one question that I wanted to ask you was, who do you think is going to be the breakout player of the year for the Bills on the offensive side of the ball as well as the defensive side of the ball? I know C.J. Spiller kind of had his little breakout last year, so he's not going to come to a surprise for many people this year, being that he had such a great year last year. Who do you think is going to be the breakout coming up for the Bills this year?
Well, I mean, if it's a rookie, I would go with Robert Woods. I could see him being immediately successful. He has the skill set to play in the NFL and to do just about anything you ask of him. I mean, he can line up outside in the slot, run deep routes, run underneath. So just his versatility and how much he can do, I think that gives him a great opportunity to be successful and to contribute from an early stage. So I'd put him up there. But if we're talking players who are already on the roster, I mean, I would go with another wide receiver and say T.J. Graham. I think he showed some flashes here and there of, being a talented receiver and having all that speed that, that he came into the NFL with. So I'd be really interested to see how the Bills utilize him in addition to Marquise Goodwin, because, it's two speedsters, two kind of undersized speedsters who, you get them in the right spot and they can hurt a defense. But again, it's one of those things where you're kind of asking guys to translate their skills to the football field, even though that might not necessarily have been their top sport. So I'd be really interested to see if Doug Marrone can take advantage of a guy like that. I go back to Devery Henderson, who is another receiver that Marrone worked with in New Orleans, who had kind of a similar rap sheet on him. He was a guy who, a little undersized, had a ton of speed, had been pretty underutilized earlier before Doug Marrone got there. But then once he got there, that was kind of the breakout for him. And granted, he had Drew Brees throwing to him, but I think that how he was utilized, how Devery Henderson was utilized, could be applied to T.J. Graham and to help him be successful.
Now, who would you say would be on the defensive side of the ball, real quick?
Oh, right. That's tough because I feel like Stephon Gilmore took strides last year, and I think that him being in Mike Pettine's defense, there's going to be a little bit more pressure on him in man coverage, but I think he's up to it, and that's what he was drafted for, was to be a solid shutdown man corner for them. So, I think, having him in that situation could be good for him, because now he can kind of get back to what he's good at instead of playing a lot of zone. And it was interesting because I actually talked to Stephon Gilmore last season, and I mentioned to him, that he hadn't been utilized as much for his strengths in man coverage, and he'd been asked to drop into zone a bit. And he was a little bit coy about it, understandably. I don't think he wanted to rip at the coaching staff because this was kind of in the middle of the season. But I feel like, if he gets back to playing a bit more in man, he'll be comfortable, and he could really surprise people.
Now, keeping in the trend with the defensive side of the ball, Bills had a couple of free agent signings with Alan Branch, Emmanuel Lawson, to help improve the defense drastically. They had brought in new coordinator, Coach Mike Pettine from the Jets, who has recently had a trend of having top 10 defenses. Do you think the Bills could eventually be a top 10 defense under him?
Yeah, no doubt. And that's one of those things, too, where I just think that schematically what they did last year was not good for them. They have the athleticism on, especially in the front seven, to really create some pressure. It's just a matter of utilizing those players the right way. And, I think, with Dave Longstead having come up in the 4-3 era of the NFL, where it was pretty much consistently straight rushes, and even with the Cowboys defense, there was not a lot of complexity to it in the 90s when they were winning Super Bowls. It was a pretty simple defense. It was just they ran it so well and they were good at it. So, Mike Pettine, I think he brings a little bit more complexity to the table, and he'll be able to get more out of those guys. And it'll be interesting because I feel like Marcel Darius and Kyle Williams, they had great seasons last year, but I feel like they were incorrectly utilized in a lot of ways, just because they, like I said, they didn't have a lot of stunting. They were kind of kept in to plug gaps a lot, and they're both of them, I think, are more gap shooters, not necessarily gap pluggers. So I'd be interested to see how they get more pressure up the middle with those two guys. and really, you know, kind of moving guys around too. You know, you might even see a little bit more going back to the 3-4. I think, you know, that's kind of been the big talking point this offseason is, you know, are we going to see more of the 4-3 or the 3-4 now that Mike Pettine's in the fold? And I think he's said, you know, a couple times now that it's going to be a mix of both. But I think, you know, it'll be one of those things too where they will change the defensive scheme to kind of fit what their opponent is capable of doing and where they need to be successful to shut opponents down.
Yeah, let's stick with defense here. One of the key names that the Bills. Well, first of all, the Bills don't have a lot of names that are familiar nationally. That's just the way it is, being a small market, and for having been not a playoff contender for 13 years now. But so one of the names that is familiar nationally is Jairus Byrd. Now, do you think that team's going to step up to the plate and, as they say, pay the man this year, or how do you think that's going to happen? Do you think they wait it out, or what?
Well, I mean, he's going to get a top contract because that's the trend that was kind of set this year with Deshaun Goldson getting a really nice contract. I think something like 4 years and something, I think around $40 million, a pretty good deal, 6-year, $40 million or something like that. LaRon Landry even, who really hasn't had a good consistent season since 2008, hasn't stayed healthy except for finally having done it last year. You know, he got 4 years and $24 million. So you're looking at a pretty big contract for Jairus Byrd next year. Now the question I think is, you know, do they have the funds to pay him? And, you know, really, I mean, I don't see why not. They would have to, they don't really have to finagle the capital. They already have, I think, $20 million in cap space set aside for next year, and not really a whole lot of priority free agents, so to speak. You know, you're looking really at simply Jairus Byrd in terms of the guys that really need to be brought back. Beyond that, you know, Erik Wood, I think, obviously is the other one, but you know, you have more than enough money to take care of both of those guys, and really to even continue to make a couple of more signings if you want to. So I'll be really interested to see if it works out for them, but I don't see any reason why, especially in Pettine's defense, where it's of paramount importance to have a great cover one safety who can go sideline to sideline, because, you know, so much is at stake with the front seven and the blitz packages. And if you have a guy like Byrd who can cover so much area of the field, especially in the back end, you know, that allows you to do a lot more up front. So having a guy like that is very valuable, and I think Jairus Byrd should be a Bill for a long time, especially if they want Mike Pettine to be the defensive coordinator for a long time.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more there. He's a necessity to keep him in the red, white, and blue. Now, earlier today, we solicited people for questions that we could ask you. We mentioned that you're going to be on the podcast. And Rob Quinn, who's actually also the lead blogger at BillsMafia.com, wanted to know, speaking of Byrd, he says, ask him why Byrd was only number 7 in the AFC East, smiley face. So, being somebody worthy of what you just said is a top contract, what was the reasoning for putting him at 7 overall in the division?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a top 25 players in the AFC East countdown over on Boston.com, and I put Jairus Byrd at number 7. He's the second highest Bill. I actually revealed C.J. Spiller as number 6 yesterday, and really, you know, I felt like, you know, Byrd is supremely talented, no question, but there are the top 5. When you see who's listed in the top 5, it's pretty clear that, you know, it would be very difficult to break that. I mean, specifically the top 4. I mean, you could make a case for between Jairus Byrd, C.J. Spiller, and Muhammad Wilkerson, who I had ranked at number 5. You could interchange them between those 7, 6, and 5 spots. You know, that's up for debate, but I put Byrd behind Spiller because, I mean, let's face it, Spiller is pretty much the totality of the Bills' offense. I mean, obviously Stevie Johnson's very talented, but C.J. Spiller, I think he's going to be the workhorse this year for them, and it'll be interesting because I think he could even make a case to move higher on such a list, this season if he carries the burden of, say 250, 300 carries and continues to be as explosive as he was last year. I think that would be something to see. So again, I think Jarvis Byrd is supremely important to the Bills defense. There are just other guys in the division I think are a little bit more talented, maybe a little bit more key components to their team, so to speak.
All right, and then one last question for me, and then I'm going to give the final question over to Mr. Brown. But you cover the whole division, as we've talked about, for both Bleacher Report and Boston.com. Now, and we're just about a month removed, a few days over a month ago, was the 2013 NFL Draft. Out of the four teams that you cover, which team do you think had the best draft class and which had the worst? And I know that it's difficult, and typically grades at this time, development is kind of premature. It normally takes 2 or 3 years, but, knee-jerk reaction. Who do you think had the best and worst classes?
Well, it's tough because it really depends on how you evaluate the draft. Do you look at needs or do you look at value? And either way, it's perilous because if you're looking at drafting for need, you have to understand that teams that draft for need are often drafting for the same need in a few years. And I'm not a fan personally of the create a hole in the off season and then address that hole in the draft strategy, which the Jets did with drafting D. Milliner after they had traded Darrelle Revis. But if you go with the value route, you're understanding that, yes, we have our preconceived notions of where these guys should be drafted now, but, in 3 years, where do they stand? Are they still considered a reach, or does the team that picked them that high look better now, having done so because that player panned out for them, or vice versa, having, just say, for instance, the Dolphins having traded up to number 3. If Deion Jordan's a stud, they look like geniuses. If Deion Jordan's not a stud, they look like idiots. So really, it's difficult to do it immediately, but I guess to get back to the question, I would just say, I think personally the Bills had the best draft just in terms of addressing needs, getting players in good spots. I still scratch my head over that E.J. Manuel pick. I just feel like they could have gotten him a little bit later, but at the same time, like I said, who am I to scrutinize for where they picked the guy? And credit to them for having conviction that E.J. Manuel was the guy for them. I mean, not enough conviction to take him at number 8 overall, but certainly enough to take him in the first round. So props to them for that. In terms of the worst draft, I mean, it's difficult for me to say the Jets because I feel like they got good players. They got Geno Smith and Sheldon Richardson and D. Milliner, but there was a lot to be desired in the later rounds. They didn't really address glaring need at guard that they really needed to find one after losing both Brandon Moore and Matt Sloss in this offseason. And really, I mean, the value they got for Geno Smith was immense considering pretty much everybody had him as their top quarterback in the draft. But, I mean, in terms of drafting D. Milliner, I think that could be one, not necessarily that comes back to bite them, but people are going to be looking at that one through the lens of, whether or not Revis was a successful pick or whether or not Revis was a successful trade, not through whether or not Milliner was a good pick. So I think that could be something that comes back to bite them. But I really do think all 4 teams did a good job in the draft. I mean, I'm not blowing smoke with that. I think the Dolphins, they had enough picks where they could really, hold monopoly over the draft and did that. They moved around the board. They paid next to nothing to get Deion Jordan. So even if that doesn't work out for them, they don't look like that much of an idiot for doing it. And then with the Patriots, like you said, the New England Scarlet Knights at this point, it's interesting because, they kind of have their whole scouting contingency go around all season long, and then they go and draft all the players who play for Bill Belichick's buddies. It's like, what did you guys just do for the past 12 months? But I look at it and I say, they know what they're getting in terms of the type of people that they drafted. And you heard Bill Belichick say that a lot after the fact. They said that, we run our ship a lot like Rutgers runs theirs, just in terms of, how much importance there is on all the preparation leading up to the games. And, that's a big thing for Bill Belichick, is all the little details that go into game planning every week and watching film and being committed to football. I think those are really important things for Bill Belichick, and he puts a little bit more value on those than, say, whether or not a player got invited to the combine or whether or not a player, was in the national spotlight. Those are not things that are so important to Belichick.
Okay. Now, my last question for you here is there seems to be a recent trend going in the NFL past a certain amount of years. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but where a team in the division has gone from worst to first in the division. Question, do you think it could be the Bills that could happen this year? And then also, what's your prediction for the Bills as in a win-loss record for the upcoming season?
Like I said, I think it's the Patriots' division to lose. I mean, that worst to first thing hasn't happened in the AFC East since 2008. I think when the Dolphins did it, they went from being 1-15 the year before to 11-5 the next year. And I'd be really interested to see if that did happen again, but I don't see it happening just because, like I said, the Tom Brady-Bill Belichick trump card for the Patriots is a little bit too much for a lot of other teams to overcome. So I'm expecting double-digit wins from them again. But the Bills, I would say 7-9 would be, I would consider that to be a successful season. And I know that obviously Bills fans are probably ready to win more games than they lose for once. But, with a brand new head coach, brand new quarterback, a lot of change personnel-wise, just in terms of the coaching staff, I mean, I think it could take a little bit for everything to get rolling, but if all cylinders are firing off at the beginning, then they could really surprise some people. So I mean, it could be 7-9, it could be 10-6 for all I know. It's really tough to predict at this point, but I definitely do think that the Bills, they're one of those boom or bust teams this year. They could really take some people by surprise, or they could really fall flat in the first year.
Absolutely. I feel a bunch of us can agree with you on the boom or bust thing, where they can really surprise a bunch, and they could also be mediocre for a number of years then. Well, we'd like to thank you once again, Erik, for joining us on the show today on Bill Central Radio. This is Erik Frenz. He writes for the Bleacher Report as well as Boston.com. Where can our listeners find you on Twitter, Erik?
It's just my name. My name is my Twitter handle. It's Erik, E-R-I-K, Frenz, F-R-E-N-Z.
Hey, this is Drew Smith with the Buffalo Bills, and you're listening to Bill Central Radio with Chris Brown and Del Reid.
We are back here on Bill Central Radio. We just finished up with our guest, Erik Frenz. We have a new guest on today's show to continue with the trend. We have Chris Trapasso. He's a writer for Bleacher Report, as well as a Bills blogger for Yahoo Sports. Thank you for joining us today, Chris.
How's it going, guys?
Going
hey,
good,
what's up, man?
thank you. Just wanted to get your opinion and analysis on some Bills topics here today. We'll start it off. First asking you, how would you gauge the Bills' last season performance? And then, with the result that they had, did they make the right choice in letting go Coach Chan Gailey as well as the rest of his coaching staff, and ultimately leading to the release of quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. As far as Chan Gailey, after his first 2 years, in his third year, he really showed that he was in over his head. As a game manager, he had a lot of troubles with clock management and, not giving the ball to C.J. Spiller enough. He really refused to evolve his coaching style or coaching philosophy around the talent that he had. And I don't think you can find any Bills fan that was mad about Ryan Fitzpatrick being released. He was a decent stopgap. He was much more exciting than the guy who he replaced, Trent Edwards, but he just didn't have any upside as a future franchise quarterback. So it was time for him to go.
Now, with the firing of Chan Gailey, it led to the hiring of Coach Doug Marrone and eventually the drafting of E.J. Manuel. What are your thoughts on those two coming into the Bills organization this year?
Well, there's just much unknown with the Bills coming into the 2013 season, but the first thing that really pops out to me about Doug Marrone is that he wasn't a retread who failed miserably in his last job. I know he was only coaching in the Big East at Syracuse, but he really turned that program around, and obviously that's a similar turnaround is needed in Buffalo. So just from that perspective, I think Bills fans should be really encouraged and excited about it. And E.J. Manuel, I wrote a long column about some of the myths that surround him as he enters the NFL, that he wasn't really that accurate in college and he can't read defenses, when in fact the stats show that he was actually one of the more accurate quarterbacks of this, the top 5 to 7 quarterbacks in the 2013 class. His skill set is very impressive. If he can just buy into this West Coast short passing offense of Nathaniel Hackett's, then I think the Bills could have their franchise quarterback on their hands that they've been looking for since Jim Kelly retired.
Hey, Chris, it's Dell. Don't you get goosebumps just thinking about that? The next franchise quarterback, like this could be the guy.
Yeah, like I said during the draft and like the whole draft season that no matter what, I just wanted the Bills to take a quarterback because they had never taken a quarterback with their first pick in any draft in the organization's history. And, every year you get excited about a first-round pick that's a cornerback or a receiver or a linebacker or a defensive tackle, but there's just something that's totally different when the first-round pick is a quarterback and he's selected to be that future franchise guy that the Bills have desperately needed for the last almost 15 years now.
Yeah, we're overdue. It's time. Okay, so moving from the draft, let's go on to the undraft, and we'll talk about the UDFAs, the undrafted free agents that the Bills have brought into OTAs this year. Who do you think is going to stand out, and do you think any are going to make an impact on the 2013 season?
Well, I think with these undrafted free agents, a lot of people try to find that really major diamond in the rough, the guy from a Division II school or 1AA. But I think Erik Rodgers, he's the most obvious, most well-known undrafted free agent, maybe of the entire 2013 draft class. And I just think his skill set, his size, I think one of the Bills scouts compared him to Eric Moulds. He plays with that edge. He really has number one receiver physical attributes. And if he can stay out of trouble, I think he'll be a huge help to the Bills receiving corps that kind of like the quarterback position and the coaching staff is really starting all over.
Right. So speaking of Erik Rodgers, do you think that the fact that the Bills have brought in some of these, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them risky players, or players with attitude or off-the-field issues, like Rodgers and Kiko Alonso and Duke Williams, do you think they're ready to take risks that they haven't done in the past? And how do you read that whole situation there? It's something they haven't done for years. They've always seemed to have gone with the safe picks. Now, in 2013, it seems like there's a little bit of a change going on here.
Well, yeah, I think that's really indicative of, or really shows the difference between Buddy Nix and Doug Whaley. They must just have different ideologies when it comes to these players. And as we've seen, like teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, if you can manage these risky players, like you said, with off-field flags in college, and you can get them at great value, like obviously Rodgers wasn't even drafted. A few people that I talked to said that Duke Williams probably would have been higher than a fourth-round pick had he not run into some legal troubles in college. If you can get those guys and you can corral them and create an atmosphere for them to mature, then you can, the sky's the limit for what you can do personnel-wise through the draft. So I don't know what's going to happen with these guys. No one does, but I just think that that's just the difference between Buddy Nix, who wanted to just always stay away from those guys, and Doug Whaley, who's a little more apt to say, hey, with this new coaching staff, Doug Marrone has a more CEO approach to being a head coach, that we can get guys that have some off-field red flags and get them at great value and then plug them into starting or very important roles on the team.
Absolutely, and we you touched on Duke Williams a little bit, keeping on the defensive side of the ball. With Coach Pettin coming in now, new defensive scheme, drastically different from Coach Wanstead's last year. How do you see the defense shaping up this year, and differences that you're going to see come in with the hybrid scheme, so to speak, that Coach Pettin runs as compared to last year's soft vanilla defenses? A lot of fans would like to say.
Well, before the draft, I said that the acquisition of Mike Pettin was the biggest offseason move for the Bills. I wasn't really worried about any other free agent signings. I was pretty sure that they weren't going to make another huge splash like they did last year with Mario Williams. But I think the defense is going to be significantly different than it was last year under Dave Wanstead. Wanstead's system is just strictly 4-3. They're in their base most of the time. They don't really try to confuse. They just say, here's what we got. Try to beat us. We're going to rush 4. We're not going to do too much on the defensive line. We're going to drop back into soft zones, keep everything in front, and it clearly didn't work. It didn't play to the talents of guys like Marcel Darius and Stephon Gilmore. Mario Williams did have statistically a good year, but he wasn't as impactful as the Bills and their fans probably would have hoped. And Pettin's system it's 3-4, it's 4-3, it's nickel, there's zone blitzes, there's corner blitzes, there's defensive linemen dropping back into coverage, there's stunts on the defensive line. We finally have moved forward to seeing the Bills go from a system that Dave Wanstead really made its mark with in the early 1990s to a futuristic, or at least an offense of today under Mike Pettin. So I think Pettin should get the most out of all the talent on the Bills roster on the defensive side of the ball. And now there really won't be any excuses for any of these players because they're going to be in a great, established, and very aggressive system.
Now you had mentioned about the moving around of all the positions that they're going to be, lining up in different positions on the field. Who do you think is going to step up and be the defensive player that's going to lead the Bills in tackles this year? Nick Barnett led the team last year in tackles. He's not on the team anymore after being released. Who do you think is going to step up and lead the Bills in tackles this year?
My early guess would probably be Nigel Bradham. I think I would guess that Mike Pettin is just in love with the fact that he inherited this guy. He's big, he's fast, he's super athletic. Some of the knocks on him coming out of Florida State last year and in his rookie year were that he was a little bit slow to process where the play was headed, or kind of bit on too many play action fakes. But he is the exact type of guy that should flourish in Pettin's downhill, blitz-happy system. So I think he's going to be around the ball often, and Bradham will lead the team in tackles.
Okay, speaking of tackles, sacks, all that stuff, it's May. It's almost June. We're waiting for training camp to begin. One thing that fans like to do, at least as I've seen on Twitter, is talk about over-unders, in terms of stat lines and everything. So I've got two for you. First one is, what do you think the over-under is for sacks on Mario Williams? And like you said, he had a good year, statistically speaking, last year, especially after his surgery. Didn't really have the impact. We're not going to worry about that. We're just talking stats right now. So over-under in terms of how many sacks you think number 94 is going to have. And what about interceptions for Stephon Gilmore? Same question, over-under.
All right, well, Williams had 10.5 sacks last year, and like you said, we're not really talking about impact, just stats. I think overall the Bills' defense will see more balance across the board on defense in terms of sacks because Pettin blitzes cornerbacks, nickelbacks, linebackers, drops a whole different bunch of personnel into coverage, and then the other side blitzes. So I think across the board we're going to see more widespread sacks, but I think 11 to 12 sacks is a pretty reasonable number for Mario Williams, which would be a slight bump from what he did last year. And interceptions for Stephon Gilmore, I think 3 is a pretty realistic number. I think he's going to be around the ball a lot. He's going to really lock on to those number 1 receivers in a lot of man coverage, almost like Darrelle Revis type role. So I would say 3 interceptions for Gilmore is a pretty safe bet.
Nice. Okay, so changing gears a little bit, we've been talking a lot of defense, so let's switch gears here. I noticed on Twitter this week you were soliciting opinions from some of your followers on the number of carries that you think C.J. Spiller is going to have in 2013. Where'd you end up on that in terms of, I missed how that might have ended on your timeline in terms of any conclusions. And just overall, what do you think about C.J. going into 2013? You know, SpongeBob SquarePants commentaries notwithstanding.
I actually ended on that I didn't do a ton of research, but I did spend a good amount of time kind of looking at other running backs and looking at where Spiller has been at a per-game basis over his career. I think 275 total carries and about 325 total touches is perfect for Spiller in 2013. Jamal Charles finished with exactly 325 total touches last year. And as we know, and as many Bills fans will attest to, that Spiller was not used enough last year under Chan Gailey, and I think he's going to be the focal point of the offense. We're really all enamored with how E.J. Manuel is going to play and when he's going to start and if he's going to sit behind Kevin Cobb at first. But I really think the running game will be the focal point of the offense. Doug Marrone ran the ball quite often at Syracuse. He's not afraid to feature that part of the offense. I think he's not going to be around that 6 yards a carry with an added 70 carries, but I think he's going to be above 5, and he's going to be still one of the most electric home run hitting backs in the NFL.
Now, keeping on the trend talking about CJ, one of the emphasis that the offseason is bringing to the Bills offense is the noticeability of speed, how fast the offense is becoming in a short amount of time with the additions of Goodwin, Spiller, TJ Graham. What are your thoughts on how quickly the Bills offense is becoming, the fastest in the league?
Well, it's totally crazy how they went from, a pretty underwhelming receiving core that definitely was not known for its speed. And then last year they drafted TJ Graham, who was known for his speed and was a 4.3 or I think a low 4.4 or high 4.3 guy. And now there's, so many options on offense that we hear a lot about how multiple and how the Bills defense is going to be hybrid. But I think the offense is you're going to see a lot of traditional sets. You're going to see a lot of read option, a lot of spread. You're going to see Marquise Goodwin coming on, jet sweeps across the formation. I just think with speed, you really can't substitute it with anything else. A lot of these guys are going to be young, and it's going to take some time for them to acclimate themselves to the professional game because, as usual, receivers take a little bit of time to kind of transition from the college game to the pro game. But if you get the ball to these guys in space, like Goodwin and like Graham and even like Robert Woods and Spiller, they can make a lot of big plays happen. So I think that'll kind of ease the transition process for a lot of these youngsters.
Oh, absolutely. All right, we got one more question for you. We earlier had asked a guest on the show, Erik, the same question. We want to get your take on it. Recently in the NFL for the past few years now, there's been a trend going on. A team from a division has gone from worst to first. In your opinion, do you think that the Buffalo Bills could be that team this year? And then also, what's your prediction for a Bills win-loss record?
Wow, that's tough. It's anytime you're in the off season and you're only thinking about the previous season, you're thinking there's no way that this team that finished dead last in their division could all of a sudden win the division the next season. But kind of like you said, every year it seems to happen. I don't think the Bills can go from worst to first, mainly because I think the first, let's say, 3 to 4 games, like the first month of the season, I think we're going to see a lot of growing pains. We're going to see, especially if E.J. Manuel starts from day one. I do think he's a little more ready than everyone else thinks, but I think with all these young guys on offense, a new scheme on defense, we're going to see some growing pains that could lead to some losses. So I think they could, with the Jets being down a little bit and with plenty of new pieces on the Miami Dolphins, I do think the Bills are definitely in contention to finish in that number 2 spot. I just don't think they're up to par with the Patriots yet. It'll be that first game is going to be very exciting for the Bills fans at the Ralph. And if you do want to play the Patriots, you want them the first week before Bill Belichick can get a lot of tape on you. I just don't see them at the same caliber as the Patriots. As far as win-loss record, I'll say 9-7, which some seasons that's not even close to the playoffs, and then sometimes 2 teams get in at 9-7. A lot of people will look at their schedule and say, they play the NFC South, they play, the AFC North. They have a lot of tough games on the schedule, but I'm a big proponent in not looking at the schedule because you never know which teams are going to suffer injuries and which quarterback's going to have a down year, which quarterback's going to have a good year. So I think 9-7 with this team with a lot of speed, a lot of youth, and much better coaching will be right there in the playoff hunt come December.
Do you think that puts them over the edge, 9-7, puts them into the playoffs? I know you had mentioned, them being in the playoff hunt. Do you think that gets them there?
Yeah, that's tough. With the AFC North is kind of in flux right now with the Steelers and in somewhat of a rebuilding mode, and we're not really quite sure how the Ravens are going to rebound from losing a lot of those players after winning the Super Bowl and the Bengals up. I think those teams will be in a similar situation to the teams in the AFC East where there's going to be a lot of parity in those divisions, and 2, maybe even 3 of those teams could battle for one of those wild card spots. So I don't know. I'll just say that I don't see them making the playoffs at 9-7. I think they'll have to get to 10-6 to get in.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions that we have for you today. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the show. That was Chris Trapasso. He writes for Bleacher Report, and he's a Bills blogger for Yahoo Sports. How can the listeners catch you on Twitter, Chris?
Just search me at Chris Trapasso, and you'll find me.
All right, that was Chris Trapasso. We'd like to thank you once again for joining us today on Bills Central Radio, and we hope you have a good day.
This is Kevin Elliott, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, and you are listening to Bills Central Radio. Go Bills.
And we're back on Bills Central Radio. This is Reid, co-host of the podcast. Unfortunately, Chris Brown was not able to make it for this segment, so you guys are stuck with me. But you don't even care. You're just sticking around now at this point to find out who won the Fathead. So let's get into it, okay? So the rule was you had to retweet one of our contest tweets that we put out over the past few weeks, and you also had to make sure you were following the Bills Central PFC Twitter account and the official Fathead Twitter account. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm going to jump into it, and I'm going to pick a name. Let's go. Our random winner is Tom Reid. Tom Reid. That's a great name. You even spell your last name right. R-E-I-D. Fantastic. All right, T Reader 87. No relation to yours truly, but still, dude's got an awesome name. Tom, the Bills Central PFC Twitter account will be getting in touch with you soon to help coordinate that. And we want to thank Fathead, who is providing you the ability to select any Buffalo Bills Fathead they have in their catalog. So that's pretty fantastic. Thank you for that, guys. All right. Again, this is Reid for Bills Central Radio. Thank you for listening, and go Bills.
Thanks for tuning in to Bills Central Radio. For Bills news, updates, stats, highlights, and more, log on to ProFootballCentral.com.
Shout, 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 shout. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Touchdown, rain, sleet, or snow. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Defense. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Buffalo. Touchdown, race lead the snow. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Let's go, Buffalo. Defense, race lead the snow. Okay, new vibe, new feel, new coach, new bills. Red, white, blue steel. Hard work, true skill. This year's on you, spill. LDM, I'm predicting that. Touchdown, Stevie Johnson, swag cooking.